Good afternoon and welcome to ACRP webinars. Today's Texpo session is entitled Partnering with Sponsors to Solve the Enrollment Problem and is sponsored by Study Team. Today's speaker is Rebecca Goldfaden, who is the Vice President of East Coast Institute for Research. Without further ado, I turn the program over to Rebecca.
Thank you very much for the introduction. As Kim mentioned, I am Rebecca Goldfaden, and I'm the Vice President of Clinical Operations at East Coast Institute for Research. We are a clinical research company that is based in Northeast Florida, and we have 5 clinical research sites throughout Florida and Central Georgia. Today, I'm going to be talking about partnering with sponsors to solve the enrollment problem. So just to dive in quickly into what the enrollment problem is, when looking at clinical research today, operationally, one of the most difficult parts about conducting a clinical trial is recruitment and meeting the enrollment targets, not only on the site level, but on the sponsor level as well. So when looking at clinicaltrials.gov, and I did run these numbers a few months ago, but there were 50,482 active trials across the industry that were actively recruiting subjects for their studies, which is a very large number of clinical studies trying to reach their enrollment goals. Nearly 50% of clinical trials do not meet their enrollment goals, and then 86% of clinical trials do not meet their goals on time. So this translates to increased costs for the drug development on the sponsor side, and also slower timelines for making new medications available to the healthcare system. We have a pretty clearly defined problem here. So the first is that sponsors rely on research sites to commit to target patient enrollment numbers. So when we as sites conduct site selection visits, we have an open conversations with the sponsors regarding how many patients do we feel that we can recruit or enroll within a certain period of time. And the sponsors rely on all the sites to meet those targets in order for the sponsor to be able to meet their enrollment goals. However, what we know is that pre-screening is a leading indicator to predictable enrollment. However, sponsors are not able to see what the sites are doing on our side. And so basically what the sponsors are able to see is they know when we have screened a patient because we entered the subjects into the IWRS system or into EDC. However, they don't know all the sites' efforts that have gone into finding that one patient. So they don't know how many patients we have identified. They don't know how many patients we've been calling to try to schedule for screening. And they don't know how many patients are currently scheduled for their screening visits. And so sponsors and CROs have created tools to try to collect the pre-screening data. However, this is different for every single sponsor and CRO. And as we all know, it creates redundant work. It is very, very time consuming in order to try to get this information to the sponsor. And so the clearly defined problem is that the sponsors do not have data transparency around what the site's enrollment efforts are. And these pre-screening logs probably look very familiar to the sites that are on this webinar right now. And so when looking at enrollment management, these are the site's struggles. It is very, very frustrating and very time consuming when all the sponsors that we work with and CROs are asking for pre-screening logs. We understand that the sponsors want to know how much effort we are putting into enrolling and recruitment for their study. However, the time that is spent on filling these pre-screening logs out can be spent, somewhere more effective, such as, pre-screening the potential patients. And so, we're thrown with these pre-screening logs that we have to complete and, either send them to the sponsors on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, and they're followed up by phone calls, etc., to try to understand what are we doing at our site level. So this creates double work for the sites, and it's really only a partial solution for the sponsors. And the reason it's only a partial solution is that it is not in real time. And so if we complete a pre-screening log and send it to the sponsor, by the time the sponsor then takes all the pre-screening logs from the hundreds of sites, gathers the information and tries to make sense of it, that's already weeks have been passed. And so in those weeks that have already passed, we could have maybe implemented a new process, and really things could have changed and improved or slowed down for some sites since those pre-screening logs have have been sent. So really, those are just band-aids, trying to gather the information. And as I mentioned, as we all know, it is very, very time-consuming to complete those pre-screening logs, and unfortunately, it provides delayed information to the sponsor. So working towards a solution, there was a global top 10 sponsor that tried an alternative approach to solve the enrollment problem, and they collaborated. They collaborated with the sites, and they collaborated with a company, Reify Health, in order to create a system that solves the solution to the lack of data transparency. So they worked with 76 study managers and 104 study coordinators, and they listened to the sites and what the sites wanted. So the biggest question from the sites was, would it be valuable if the site's system could communicate directly with the sponsor? And I think everyone on this webinar could answer that as a yes. That would be very, very valuable. And so that's what they did. They started creating a solution that would help the sites as well as help the sponsors. And this is kind of what I was talking about earlier, is that the sponsors see how many patients are in screening and how many patients are actively enrolled. But it's that whole section before that the sponsors are not seeing. And so this is what we're trying to find that solution for, is getting that data in real time so the sponsors have real-time knowledge of the pre-screening efforts. And the solution is called Study Team. And Study Team has benefits for both the site and the sponsor. So myself, I'm on the site side. And so what it has found for me is that it replaces these multiple tracking systems. So there's no more logs, there's no more tracking systems, and it's all in one single system. So whether we're working with 10 or 30 different sponsors or CROs, everything is in one system. And we can share this progress with the sponsors in real time. Now, on the sponsor side, in case there are some sponsors or CROs on this webinar today, it provides access to the sponsors and CROs of the data in real time. In addition, they're not having to reach out to the site. So we're reducing workload for the site staff as well as the sponsor staff and having that data transparency. This is a main screen for one of our studies. And so as you can see here, there's multiple columns here. And just to start off on the top, again, you see that blue heart there, which that indicates to us that, again, that information is de-identified and it's shared with the sponsor in real time. So when we have a sponsor that is utilizing Study Team, we don't have to fill out any pre-screening logs. We don't have frequent, emails or phone calls asking what we're doing on our end in order to potentially identify patients, because they can log in and they can see we have 10 potential patients, we have 11 in pre-screening, we have 3 first visit schedules. They see all of this information that if we were not utilizing Study Team, they would not know what efforts we have already put into it. And then one aspect of Study Team that I really like personally is that it does show, when we pull a log from Study Team, it shows the date that we enter the patient into Study Team. And so it demonstrates to the sponsors, how often we're actively working in Study Team, how many months that we've been working to identify these patients, and how engaged are we in order to meet our enrollment goals. And then, as I mentioned, all site staff have the necessary information for all clinical trials on one system. And so, just to explain how our company utilizes it, we put potential patients within the potential candidate column. And then once we start calling the patients, we'll move them over to pre-screening. And then once the patients are scheduled for their screening visit, we move them over to the first visit scheduled. There's lots of features there. You can see dates and times, and we utilize those features. But as I mentioned, you're not required to use any specific feature, and you can tailor it to your site. So is the solution working? I can say for our company, which we have 5 sites, and we've been using the system for, I think, approximately 3 or 4 years, yes, it is working. And when I talk to other sites at, Site Solution Summit or SOCRA, the sites that are using this are very, very happy, and they're wanting to integrate Study Team into their own recruitment and enrollment workflow. So there's been very, very high uptake by the sites. and the sponsors have data transparency and are seeing improvement in enrollment for the sites that are utilizing the system.
Thank you, Rebecca. So this is Kent Sear. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Reify Health, and playing sort of part-time moderator here. So there are a couple of questions that that have come in that I'll sort of work through right now, and I see there may be a couple more that are coming in real time. So the first is, if the sponsors have access to the data, how can we as coordinators ensure that the information that needs to be de-identified is not accessible to the sponsor? So maybe Rebecca, you could talk about your experience on sort of any concerns around PHI and security and study team.
Yes. So the when you put the patient's name in, that is automatically a de-identified. So you just want to be sure that you're not manually entering the patient's name into any features. But what the sponsor can see, they can see the number of patients that are in each field, but they don't see the specifics. Now, if the sponsor has an enrollment log, then there are some fields that you would free text, and you would just want to be sure that you don't enter patient information within that free text, because that is information that the sponsor would see. And typically those questions are, if the patient screen failed, what exclusion number would did the patient meet? And so you would simply put, 3 or 4 or whatever the number is. But we have had 0 issues with any PHI going over to the sponsors, because they are just simply seeing the high level information. And I can go back real fast to show you what they are seeing, but they are just seeing high level information of how many patients do we have in potential, how many patients do we have. So they're seeing, potential candidates. We have 10, pre-screening we have 11, first visit scheduled we have 3, and actively enrolled we have 29. So they're seeing that information. And then, like I mentioned, any additional information that we enter into the pre-screening log, everything else they do not have access to.
Great, yeah, and I'll just add that because study team is really meant to mimic the same workflows and patient logs that sites are using, tools like Excel for, it very much mimics the same data that you would enter in those logs anyways. And then the way that study team was designed was to be very prescriptive about where certain information is added and what types of information is added in those fields. And on the back end, we make sure that we strip out any fields containing PHI before any of that information is transferred over to the sponsor. So sort of an added layer of security on top of the normal sort of patient log workflow that sites already engage in. Another question here, Rebecca, how many sponsors are willing to use this system? Also, would all sponsors that choose to adopt this system have real-time access to the data entered? And I can actually, field a first pass at that. And Rebecca, if you want to add anything on top of that. In terms of how many sponsors want to use this, we've got about half of the top 20 global biopharma sponsors and growing, plus several other biopharma companies outside of the top 20. But that's a number that's rapidly expanding. And then the other thing that I'll mention from a services perspective is our customer success team does a lot of work in helping sites connect trials that they're working on that are not necessarily sponsor activated trials, connecting those trials with those sponsors. So we do the work in terms of advocacy and service to connect sites to the sponsors if they want to activate certain trials on study team.